Not many understood the weight of Jesus' call to partner with him in his kingdom agenda, the Great Commission to save souls from sin and death. For some, it was a mere concept, misinterpreted, redefined, or buried beneath the noise of youthful zeal. Josiah was one such young man. Ambitious and driven, he stumbled across an intriguing advert: join the vine field, workers wanted for the Great Kingdom agenda. Without hesitation, he emailed his CV. A few days later, he received a response inviting him to an interview. When he arrived, Josiah found himself in a room filled with impeccably dressed men and women, their demeanor exuding confidence and wisdom. "Here we preach Christ, heal the sick, and raise the dead," said a sharp-looking woman who introduced herself as Madame Obu. "We await the Great Commission when Christ returns. Are you ready for this?" "Absolutely," Josiah replied enthusiastically. Madame Obu outlined his duties. "You'll write proposals to 100 individuals and companies seeking support for needy farmers across 20 villages. We plan to visit them next week." Josiah got to work, pouring his heart into the task. Funds rolled in, and soon the team headed to the villages, organizing a grand crusade. Crowds swarmed the grounds as the pastor preached. The sick were healed, the dead seemingly raised, and awe gripped the audience. Josiah couldn't believe his eyes. What a mighty God! Yet, amidst the miracles, two men in dark glasses watched him with unsettling intensity. Later, during a team debrief at their hotel, a team member let out a peculiar confession. "I don't deserve this commission. I injected the dead man to rise again." Silence filled the room before laughter erupted. Josiah sat quietly, unsure of what to make of it. Back in the office, Madame Obu praised Josiah's work. "You're doing well. Next week, we'll visit a missionary friend deep in the forests of Kumba. Will you join me?" "Of course," Josiah replied, eager for the adventure. The journey was grueling. For 3 days, they traversed dense forests, crossing rivers and braving the wilderness. Hunger gnawed at Josiah, and his energy waned. "Madame Obu, can I have some of your snack and water?" he asked. "What? Have you forgotten we're fasting?" she snapped. As he yawned, his pale face betrayed his exhaustion. "Sit here and wait for me," she said abruptly before disappearing into the forest. Alone, Josiah felt the weight of the ominous clouds gathering above. Time crawled by until two strangers emerged from the shadows, summoning him to meet the missionary. In a dimly lit hut, a frail man with piercing eyes greeted Josiah. "So you're interested in the Great Commission?" "Yes," Josiah stammered. "Good. But everything comes with a price," the man said coldly. "What will you offer in exchange? Your leg, finger, or tongue?" Josiah froze. "What? I don't understand," he said, trembling. "No time for questions," the man barked. "Choose." Josiah hesitated, his heart pounding. My finger," he whispered. The man produced a sharp object covered in broken glass and ordered Josiah to place his finger on it. He winced as the glass sliced through his skin. "Oh dear. Did it hurt?" Madame Obu's voice rang out. She stepped into the room, smiling. Back at the office, Josiah's role shifted. He now coordinated special meetings with secret donors. One evening, he overheard a conversation. "Do you trust him?" a man asked Madame Obu. "Yes," she replied. "He's already initiated." Their laughter echoed in the hallway, chilling Josiah to the bone. Suddenly, his fingers stiffened, locking into a frozen state. He stared in horror as they became motionless. "Jesus Christ, what's happening to me?" he cried out. But no answer came, only the haunting realization that the Great Commission he thought he'd embraced was shrouded in something far darker than he ever imagined. Josiah's frozen fingers burned with an eerie numbness as he sat alone in the office, his mind racing. He replayed Madame Obu's words. "He's already initiated." Initiated into what? Before he could think further, his phone buzzed. It was Madame Obu. "Josiah, meet me in the conference room. We have an important briefing." He hesitated, but with his fingers regaining some movement, he made his way to the room. "Josiah," she began, her tone unusually formal, "you've proven your loyalty, and it's time you know the full scope of the mission." The lights dimmed, and a projector hummed to life. On the screen were images of vast farmland, villages, and then underground chambers filled with strange machinery and people chanting in low, guttural tones. This, she said, pointing to the screen, is the true vine field. A kingdom agenda to ensure the Great Commission is fulfilled our way. Josiah's throat went dry. What? What is this? The healing, the miracles, the success of our missions, one of the men in glasses said. They come at a cost. We partner with forces that ensure our work is effective. You mean demonic forces? Josiah whispered, his voice barely audible. Madame Obu's smile vanished. Careful with your words. You're part of this now. The donors, the sponsors, the success, it's all tied to a higher power. And if you want to stay, you must embrace it fully. Josiah's heart raced. And if I don't? The man in glasses chuckled darkly. Then you'll wish you had never set foot in the vine field. Josiah spent the night locked in his room, the projector's images haunting him. He couldn't believe what he had become a part of. The miracles, the money, the influence, it was all a facade hiding something sinister. As dawn broke, Josiah made his decision. He had to escape, but he knew they'd be watching. Carefully, he packed his things and slipped out of the building. He didn't get far. At the edge of the compound, the two men in dark glasses intercepted him. Leaving so soon, one sneered. Josiah bolted, adrenaline pumping through his veins. He ran through alleyways, past markets, and into the forest. He had no plan, only the overwhelming need to flee. The forest grew darker the deeper he ran. Strange sounds filled the air, whispers, laughter, and the faint hum of the chants he'd seen in the video. Suddenly, he tripped, falling face first into a clearing. When he looked up, he saw a figure dressed in white, holding a lantern. Josiah. The figure said gently, "Why are you running?" Tears streamed down Josiah's face. "I don't know what I've gotten myself into. I thought I was serving God, but now, I don't even know who I am anymore." The figure knelt beside him. "You've been deceived, but the truth can set you free. Will you surrender everything to Jesus, the real Jesus?" Josiah nodded, sobbing uncontrollably. As the figure prayed over him, a brilliant light filled the clearing. Josiah felt an overwhelming peace wash over him, unlike anything he'd ever experienced. His fingers, still tingling from the earlier paralysis, suddenly moved freely. When he opened his eyes, the figure was gone, but in his heart, Josiah knew he had encountered the true power of God. He returned to the city, determined to expose the vine field for what it truly was. But the organization was one step ahead. Madame Obu had branded him a traitor, and soon Josiah found himself hunted not only by the vine field but also by those who believed in its miracles. Josiah began gathering evidence, secretly recording meetings and reaching out to journalists and pastors willing to listen. He discovered that he wasn't the first to try and escape the vine field. Others had tried and failed. One night, as he prepared to release his findings, his phone buzzed with a message. "We know where you are. Stop or we'll stop you." Fear gripped him, but Josiah remembered the lantern and the figure in the forest. He whispered a prayer. "Lord, guide me. Give me strength to fight this battle." The next morning, he released the evidence online, unveiling the dark secrets of the vine field. The exposé spread like wildfire, drawing attention from authorities and sparking outrage among those who had supported the organization. But the battle was far from over. The vine field retaliated, and Josiah found himself at the center of a spiritual and physical war, where every step forward brought him closer to the truth and the ultimate confrontation with the forces that had enslaved so many. Josiah stood in the bustling square, his heart pounding as the crowd around Madame Obi chanted louder. The figure with the lantern stepped closer, their light piercing the oppressive atmosphere. Madame Obi shielded her eyes, stumbling backward. "Who dares interrupt the work of God?" she bellowed, her voice trembling. The figure, now clearly visible, was an elderly man with deep-set eyes and an unmistakable aura of peace. He raised the lantern higher, its light illuminating the square. "God's work," the man said, his voice calm but powerful. "This is not his work. The Lord does not dwell in deception or manipulation." The crowd murmured in confusion. Some of Madame Obu's followers stepped back, uncertain. Josiah seized the moment, stepping forward. "Everything you've seen, the miracles, the funds, the so-called missions, was a lie," he shouted. "They are puppets of darkness, trading your faith for their gain." Madame Oba laughed, though it was shaky. Josiah, you speak as if you're holy. Tell them about your finger. Tell them what you gave up for this mission. Josiah held up his hand, the faint scar on his finger still visible. Yes, I was deceived. I was blind. But the truth set me free. He turned to the crowd. And it can set you free too. The two men in dark glasses emerged from the crowd, flanking Madame Obu. Enough of this, one of them growled, reaching for Josiah. But before they could act, the lantern's light flared, and they froze, their hands trembling. The elderly man stepped closer to Madame Obu. Your time is up. Repent and turn away from this path before it's too late. Her face twisted in fury. I serve a higher power, and it's not your God. With a sudden motion, she reached into her robe and pulled out a small, intricately carved idol. She raised it above her head, chanting in a language that sent shivers down Josiah's spine. The sky darkened unnaturally, and a cold wind swept through the square. People screamed and scattered as an ominous shadow began to form above her. Josiah dropped to his knees, tears streaming down his face. Jesus, help us! Break this darkness, he cried. The elderly man nodded, holding the lantern higher. Everyone, pray. Call on the name of the Lord. Some in the crowd hesitated, but others knelt and began to pray, their voices rising above the chaos. As the prayers grew louder, the shadow above Madame Obi began to waver. No, she screamed, clutching the idol tighter. I won't let you win. But the light from the lantern grew blinding, engulfing the square. The idol in her hand cracked, then shattered into dust. Madame Obi collapsed to the ground, weeping uncontrollably. The two men in dark glasses fell to their knees, their faces pale. We were wrong, one whispered. We were so wrong. The sky cleared, and sunlight poured into the square. The crowd, now silent, watched as the elderly man turned to Josiah. You have been called, not to serve men, but to serve the living God. Will you answer that call? Josiah stood, his heart filled with peace. Yes, I will. The elderly man smiled and handed him the lantern. Then go. Lead others out of the darkness and into the light. Madame Obu, still on her knees, looked up at Josiah. Forgive me, she whispered, her voice broken. It's not me you need to ask, Josiah replied gently. Seek forgiveness from the one who holds eternity.
Battle's not mine to win.